Now, over the years, things have morphed. And in the 1990s, for political reasons that did not foresee the catastrophe that DPRK would become, the UN allowed both DPRK and RMK to be members of the UN. But I contend that at this point in 2016, especially with the development of international law, the responsibility to protect, the greatly increased accountability for atrocity crimes, that DPRK has lost its legitimacy, does not deserve to be a UN member. And by acting in the General Assembly, you avoid the veto power of China, of course. And through greatly increased political will, I think that we can change the calculus or influence the calculus for China to realize that its propping up of this pariah entity is no longer so useful for them. I think there's no other way China will cooperate. It's only through massive political will that it will, I think.
Thank you, Grace. Would you like to respond to that?
First of all, Grace, on the prison camps, we have regularly called out for the immediate release of folks in the prison camp, the closing of the prison camps. I mean, I can't give you the statements offhand, but if you do a search on the State Department website of statements on North Korea and human rights, in almost all of them, you'll see calls to close the camp. In terms of political will, this issue is being raised at the highest levels of the Chinese government by the highest levels of the U.S. government. That's one of the reasons that, if not the primary reason, that the Deputy Secretary of State is going out to China right now to raise this issue. Samantha Power has regularly raised it with her Chinese counterparts. China is increasingly emboldened and not as susceptible of pressure as maybe it was a decade ago. So it is become increasingly difficult. Russia, as you know from the Syria situation, is equally intransigent. So we have very, very tough political battle to get both of them to take significant action when it comes to North Korea or any human rights problem. I mean, that's why we thought that the Security Council resolution that we managed to get through in March was a significant step forward. On the One Korea, kicking DPRK out, I'm not as familiar with the history of the One Korea policy as you describe it, so I need to educate myself a little better. On kicking North Korea out, we'll have to think about it. That's obviously, again, a very tall order, but it's something we'll have to consider. Maybe you and I can discuss some of these afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah?
Write a paper, Grace. Okay. No.
I enjoyed listening to Secretary Busby's presentation, neatly arranging the lines of enhancement of international awareness and then access to information outside North Korea, and also accountability. For the first objective, that is enhancing international awareness of the seriousness of North Korean human rights situation, has been done very successfully. In that regard, I think U.S. policy on North Korean human rights has been successful, and especially with the report by the COI, the Committee of Inquiry, that came out, as Secretary Busby referred to, 2004. That also has to do with accountability. They recommended that the North Korean case involving individuals, including Kim Jong-un, be referred to ICC for the charges of a crime against humanity. And that's my first part of the question, whether the U.S. is still pursuing that referral. And during this UNGA season, I haven't heard anything much on it, whether U.S. is still pursuing on it. Second part, information program eventually will lead to some sort of internal change from within as a result of the spreading information from outside into the audiences in North Korea. if that internal change happens along the line that we perceive we want, it's gonna have a positive impact on North Korean human rights situation. Now, but it is a long shot, it's a long haul. You cannot guarantee, and you even mentioned that effectiveness of human rights policy or sanctions, there are certain areas we can say that has been effective, but other areas I'm more concerned about actual state of North Korean human rights situation. I have not seen any indication or report that North Korean human rights situation has improved as a result of application of US policy as it has been doing so far. Now, that said, whether administration ever consider anything other than current course, that is the sanctions and enhancing international awareness and information program, apart from these efforts they've been engaged in so long and with limited results, whether administration or anybody in the administration has ever considered engaging North Koreans directly on this very issue, as we try to do on nuclear missile issue as well. Lastly, not too long ago, the President Park Geun-hye of South Korea called for mass defections from North Korea. How this going to affect or fit into one of the three lines of U.S. policy, accountability, or is it? To me, it sounds more like having to do with internal change eventually.
Very good points. I realized, Peter, I didn't react because there were two comments in a row. I can't obviously talk about covert programs, but we're trying to get information in any way we can. And indeed, there's a North Korean defector in South Korea now who is developing drones, small drones, to get in information, which we think will be far more effective than a balloon program. So anyway, there are a variety of efforts in this regard, but I can't talk more about other things that we're considering. The information efforts, I talked about in my remarks, are not covert. I mean, our bureau is funding them, PPG is doing things. So there is a lot going on there, and it is a major focus of our activity. In terms of engaging the North Koreans directly, as you probably know, we have a hard time in doing that. They are not so open to talking to us. Most of our communications with them happen through third parties right now. So, on occasion, when there have been opportunities to raise issues directly with them, human rights has been among the things that we have raised. But, our experience so far is that mere talk is not sufficient. We really need to kind of apply some leverage, which is why this new sanctions effort is something that we've undertaken, and we want to ramp up even further. The more we can identify the individuals who may be responsible for human rights abuses and then put them on the sanctions list, I think the more pressure, the more real pressure they're going to feel to possibly change their behavior.
Anybody, you have something to say?
Well, sir, I just want to thank the United States for its leadership and the international community for taking interest in the North Korean human rights issue. There was once a time when I myself had difficulty going to bed because of the human tragedies that must be going on, even at this very moment, on the North Koreans. I have two questions for you, sir. Number one is, are you concerned that your efforts might actually be hardening the North Korean position, that they will need nuclear weapons exactly because of these kinds of efforts, because it threatens their regime's survivability? And the second question is, how much focus are you putting towards your own allies, for instance, South Korea? And would the United States be willing to accept more North Korean defectors coming into the United States? And I ask the second question because there's something interesting going on where a North Korean woman who defected to South Korea is actually wanting to go back to North Korea. So the bottom line is, a lot of these North Korean defectors are having a real difficult time adjusting to capitalist, in the environment. So there needs to be a greater effort by the South Koreans and everybody else to help these defectors to be successful, which I think is probably going to be a lot more sensible and easier for us to do. And when this word of mouth gets into the ears of the North Koreans, they'll be more likely to defect. Right now, as it stands, a North Korean in North Korea, they might think that, okay, I'm gonna get 3 hamburgers if I defect to South Korea, but I'll be a slave. And why should I'll just have half a hamburger a day. So we need to educate our allies, as well as give more opportunities to the North Koreans. So that's why I asked the second question.
Thank you.
Excellent questions. First, in terms of whether our efforts on human rights may be hardening the regime, particularly when it comes to nuclear weapons. I think there was a time several years ago when that was a concern, when people felt that the regime might be open to negotiations around the nuclear issue. We have seen such erratic and scary behavior out of Kim Jong-un and the regime when it comes to the nuclear issue that, as far as we can tell, is unconnected to the pressure we might be putting on them on human rights. Certainly he reacted quite negatively to say the designation of him as a human rights abuser, and to other times that we've called him out. But some of the things he's done in terms of the missile launches and the like have been disconnected from human rights advocacy that we've done. So at this point, we don't feel like the human rights effort detracts from the effort to rein in his nuclear ambitions. In terms of the ROK, we are working very, very closely with them. Indeed, we started a quarterly human rights dialogue with them around human rights in the DPRK to make sure our efforts are closely lashed up. Ambassador Bob King and I, in fact, are going to be going out to South Korea next month for the second iteration of that dialogue. So, very, very key country. And then when it comes to defectors, I have not spent, in fact, I've never spent any time in South Korea other than at Seoul Airport. So this will be my first trip there. I do know that there's great difficulty in adjusting to life in the free capitalist world. I'm also told that South Koreans are not always as welcoming of North Koreans as they might be. That there is a sort of subtle discrimination that sometimes takes place in South Korea. I defer to those of you who have lived in South Korea, to talk more about that. But certainly to the extent that this group can help enlighten South Koreans, encourage South Koreans to be more welcoming of North Koreans, I think that would be very important. The U.S. has expressed a great deal of willingness to receive the North Koreans. The vast majority of them, though, understandably, think that coming to the U.S. would be even more difficult than trying to integrate in South Korea, just because of the language and culture difficulties there. It's easier, obviously, being there in the region to stay in touch with family members and contacts in North Korea. So even if it's a challenge to integrate in South Korea, it's most defectors perceive it as an even greater challenge to come to a place like the U.S. That said, we have received some North Koreans, and they seem to have done reasonably well.
Thank you, Scott. Just one bonus question, then we go for lunch. It's a bonus question. Don't lose it. Come to the microphone, quick.
Thank you, Honorable Rusby, for all you've done. I appreciate that very much. My name is Jin Minh Nguyen from Voice of Vietnamese Americans. I would like to ask if you, with all the experience you have had with Myanmar and all other countries, including Vietnam, and especially Vietnam, would you like to see are reflecting some good lessons that you have used in Vietnam. And if there's a step further that would show the effectiveness of the U.S. diplomacy that can be applied, that will show the light at the end of the tunnel. But also, the big question is, does the U.S. have a project working together with China to improve the human rights in North Korea, in Vietnam, and in the Southeast Asia, especially in the Indo-China region? Because I believe that if that is put under the oversight of the United Nations, that would help tremendously the whole region. And right now, I think Vietnam is suffering tremendous turmoil because of the problems that China imposed on the government. So is there a political will that the U.S. government display to China? And would you propose, what would you propose to the next president of the U.S. in that direction? Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Lessons from Myanmar and Vietnam. I've already talked about the incredibly important role that sanctions play in the Myanmar transition. And so I think that imposing these sanctions on North Korea on human rights grounds is an important step, and I think we just need to expand our efforts in that regard. The real challenge here, by the way, is getting sufficient information about who is really responsible for abuses, and for purposes of designating someone for economic sanctions,